In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a live streaming app using Mux and Flutterflow. So let's check it out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up 3 pages. First is going to be a page full of the list of broadcasts. Then the next 2 pages are going to be 2 live streaming pages. One for the person who's running the live stream and the other for the viewers. So first, the list of live streaming pages. So let's come over and let's create a new page. And let's just go over to lists and grab a good template page. And this transaction one looks good. We'll just modify it. We'll just call it streams and use my theme. Okay, great. So let's just modify this a little bit for our app. So we can just delete this container right here. We can change this transactions to streams. We could just say recent streams. And we don't need all this in here. We'll just take out this text and we'll just have this text say stream name, and that'll be changed once we actually bind this to our collection. And then let's just add an icon button, and this will be used to show if there's an active live broadcast going on. So let's just change that. And let's just use this kind of Wi-Fi-ish thing for the live icon and change it to a red for live. And this is going to be bound to Firebase collection, so we can just get rid of these extra ones because they will be automatically populated. And let's just give this a little bit of love right here. Perfect. And we can see we got some errors here. Of course, we can go in here and it'll tell us when we click on it, it'll bring us to the error. And whenever you're using template pages, it's going to come in with some actions, so you can just delete those. Next, let's add a button for starting a live stream. So let's come to our top level here, our scaffold, and let's look for a floating action button. Pops it down to the bottom. And inside there, let's add an icon. And let's change the icon to like a play button. That's good. Let's change it to white and a little bit bigger. Great. And then let's just change the color here to red because we're going to be, starting a live stream. Great. Next, let's create a collection for our broadcasts. So we're going to come over to Firestore, and we've already got a users collection, and we're going to add a streams collection. And we're going to want 4 fields here. The first one is we're going to want the name of our streams, and of course that's going to be a string. We're going to want a field for if the stream is live right now. That's that little icon we set up right here. So we're going to need a variable to be able to indicate if it's live right now. So let's just call it is live. And that only has 2 states. So if something has 2 states, you always want a Boolean. That's great. Next, we're going to need a URL for the stream because the viewers are going to need to know where to get this. That's what we're going to feed into our video widget. And finally, we're going to need a timestamp. Awesome. Now, in order to see what we're doing, let's just add some dummy content in here. And let's add a document. Let's just call it cribbage stream, of course. Let's say it is live, and we'll just generate a random time. Great. Now let's bind this collection to our list right here. So let's go into our list view and come over to query type, and we want to grab a collection, and we want it to be our streams. That's right. And we want to order it by time decreasing so that the newest one will be on top. Because as time goes on, the timestamp gets bigger, so we want it to get smaller, so the stuff in the past is down here. Okay, awesome. Let's confirm that. Just telling us we're going to make a bunch of children. We only have 1 child right now, but it's just showing some dummy stuff. That's great. Now let's bind our text to our name. And so we go into here, we grab that. This is, if we hover over here, it'll tell us where it's coming from. It's coming from our list view querying of our Firestore collection, which is exactly what we want. That's beautiful. We've got our name, which is what we want. Now it's bound. Awesome. And now our icon button, we want conditional visibility because we only want to show it if it's live. And so we can set that once again from our document, and we want to say is live. Here's another cool thing you could also do design-wise is you could set the fill color to a condition, and you could say, if it's not live, set it to gray, and if it is, to red, which is just another visual decision you can make, but it just shows you the flexibility of what you can do in Flutterflow. Next up, let's add a bottom sheet, so a little pop-up that comes up so that we can name our broadcast before we start it, because then we can send that into our database and see it here. So in order to add a bottom sheet, we first have to have a component to serve as a bottom sheet. So come over here to your components, and let's add a new component, and let's just use a bottom sheet from this option right here. We need something just simple that has an input field, so this will work fine. We don't need this or this. This we can change to start stream. Let's use our red, and this will be name stream. And we don't need a hint text for now. Okay, great. So then let's go back to our page, streams page, and in our icon button, let's add an action. On tap, we want to show a bottom sheet. And the only one we have available is the bottom sheet, which is great, and we'll leave it there for now. Next, let's add our 2 live stream pages. So the first one, let's do the page for when you are doing the live streaming. So let's add a page. We'll call this live stream. Just make it blank. Let's get rid of our app bar. Let's get rid of our column. And all we need is our Mux broadcast widget. And so you can see here we've got the button for flipping your camera, so you can choose your front or your rear camera. And of course, if you go down to our properties panel, you've got all styling options. So just change the start button to our red we've been using for the recording. That text looks great. Let's just round our corners so we match this curvature right here. That's kind of cool. Give it about 30 border radius, and that's looking good. And let's just push it off from the edges just a little bit. The next thing we need to do is set up an action when the stream starts, and I'll show you why. So come over to the action flow editor, and let's add an action, and we have on broadcast start. And what we're gonna wanna do is to create an entry in our database for this stream. So let's come down to our database right here and create a document. The collection will be the one we've set up, streams, and then we're gonna add our fields. Now remember, we set up 4 fields, and it's just gonna populate them in order when you click the fields. So we come down here and you can see that they're all gonna populate. Now we'll get to the name in a second because we're gonna have to pass that from the previous page. Remember that bottom sheet that we set up? So we'll come back to that. We can set our is live field. It's a Boolean. And so when we're starting the broadcast, we're gonna say it's true because it is live. Next, we'll set the URL. This is the URL of the broadcast. And we don't want a specific value because we want it to be dynamic. It's going to come from a variable, and that variable is from our Mux broadcast widget. So we go into widget state, and we can see here we have it. Add that, close that up. And for our time variable, we want it from a variable and global properties and current time. So now let's deal with our name. Now, to figure out where we're going to get that value of the name, we have to think about what's the routing that's going on. How is the user moving around in the app? Well, remember, if we're in our streams page here, they click on this button to start a live stream, and then the bottom sheet pops up. And that's just a component that we set up. So then let's go over to our component. Here's our bottom sheet, and they'll name the stream, and then they'll push the start stream button. So it's from here that we want to pass the value. Okay, great. So here, let's rename this so it makes sense when we're passing this value around. And we'll call this stream name. And then we come into this button here. And this is just the template action, so we can get rid of that, delete. And we're going to want to navigate to our live streamer page. And here is what we're looking for, parameters. Parameters is how you pass data between pages. And we're going to define the parameter, and it'll shoot us over to that page because we need to set up the parameter in here because it will accept that data. Right now, we don't have anything to accept it. So let's add a parameter. The parameter name will be stream name, and it's going to be a string. Great, confirm it. Now let's go back to our bottom sheet. So we defined it in the target location. We have a parameter that is prepared to accept it, but we didn't define what we're going to actually put into that bucket. So that's what we need to do now. We want to select a parameter to pass to Livestreamer. Okay, cool. So we're going to do stream name. And we open that up and we want to say, well, what do we want to put in this stream name? We don't want a specific value. That would mean put something in here. We want from a variable, and it's going to be from a widget, and it's going to be stream name. And you can see when we highlight here, it shows us which widget we're talking about. Okay, awesome. So now we can go back to the page, because now that we have all the data flowing correctly, then we can bind that name to the name property when we're creating a database document. Okay, so let's go back to our page, Livestreamer, click on there, and we need our name. It's going to be not from a specific value, but from a variable. And there it is. That's the symbol for parameters being passed. And you also know this because you can see it's highlighted from that root widget. Great. So now when we start our broadcast, we'll be creating a Firestore document with all of the fields set properly. Next, let's set up the action for when we end the stream. So let's go into our editor. And let's come into broadcast stop. And what do we want to do here? Well, we want to do two things. The first thing is we want to update the record so that is live property is false, because when you stop the broadcast, it's not live anymore. And we use that for the routing of the user when they click on the streams, like where they should go. And then we'll want to navigate the user back to the streams page. So let's come in here and we want to update our database. We want to update a document, and let's come in here, and we don't have a document to update. That's right, because to get access to it, we have to come back to our, when we started it, if we come in here and right down here, our action output variable name, that's what we need to set, because we created our document here, and that's the document we want to reference. And we set the name of this document right here. So let's just call it created document. And so now when we come back to our on broadcast stop here, to our updated call here, and we see this action outputs, we now have access to this because in our action flow here, we defined that variable. So now we have this, we've got our created document, and we want a reference to the document. And what are we going to do? We're going to update one of the fields, not the name one, but the is live, and it's going to be false. That's great. So now let's just push the user back to that streams page. So we want to navigate to streams. All right, so now let's add the page for the viewers. So let's just come back in to our widget tree and add a new page, live stream viewer. And a blank page. Don't need our app bar and don't need our column. And let's add in a video element. Great. Now, we don't have any width or height. Now, you might be wondering, hey, we don't want this kind of video right here because normally in live streaming, people are vertical. Well, we don't have any width or height, so it'll default to whatever aspect ratio video we have streaming in, which is what we want. The last thing we need to do on this page is set up some parameters. And parameters are like catching mitts or buckets. They're just variables that are set up to receive information at some point during your app. And we need these because when a user clicks on a live stream and comes to this page here, this video is going to be dynamic. And so we will pass the URL to the stream to this page. We'll catch it in the page parameters, and then that parameter will be bound to this video player itself. So let's just come over to these page parameters. Let's add a parameter. Let's call this URL, and it's going to be a video path. And that's all we need. Now let's set up our Mux account. So we're just going to need some stuff from a Mux account. So let's just go over to mux.com and sign up for an account. And of course, there's a nice free tier. Now we really just need two things out of here, our API key and secret. So you can go down here to settings and grab access tokens. Generate a new token, and we're interested in the video streaming, and we need both read and write access, and that's it. Now, of course, don't share this with anyone and promise me you won't use this, and copy your token ID. And then we're going to go back into Flutterflow, into our settings, scroll all the way down to the bottom to Mux live stream and enable it for your account. Put in that token ID and then copy and paste your secret, the second one, and then deploy it. Great, and we're all good. Okay, sweet. So now let's set up the action when you actually click on a stream. Now, there's going to be some conditional logic, so let's open up our action flow editor to get a little bit more room. So we were just on the list of all the streams. Some of those are going to be live and some of those are going to be not live, like archived. So when they click on it, the first thing we have to do is to check whether it's live, because the URL is going to be different. It's not going to be the same URL from when it's streaming to when it's not streaming. So let's check for that condition first. And so we can come down here and add a conditional action. And what we want to look for is that is live property. So here's our streams document. You might be thinking, hey, where is this coming from? Well, we just clicked on that list that is generated from our call to our Firestore. So whichever one we click on, that's going to be the document that we're referencing right here, whatever we clicked on. So this is what we want, but we don't want the whole document. We just want to see whether it's live. And this is the only one that's available because this condition is checking for true or false, a Boolean condition. Now, if you need other types of check-in, of course, you can come into these right here, but we don't need that right now, so we can just do this. Now, if it's true, that is to say, if it's live, if someone is streaming the broadcast right now, then we're going to want to navigate to that page. So let's navigate to our live stream viewer. Okay, great. But when we get there, we're going to need a URL so that our app knows like what to show. So we want to pass a parameter. And if you remember, we already set up that parameter on that page, and that's why we're seeing this. If there weren't any parameters set up, then we would just see define here. But we can just pass it now. And it was set as the URL, so we're going to pass the URL. And we don't want a specific value. We want from a variable, and it's coming from our streams document. Remember, that's the one we clicked on, and it's going to be the only one available because it's of type video URL, and so we can grab that, and we're all good. So when the user clicks on it, if it's a live stream going on right now, then we're going to navigate to our live stream viewer page. And along with that page, we're going to pass the URL from that Firebase document. All right, awesome. Okay, so what if it's not live? What do we do then? This is going to be the most complicated part of this app. So let's just talk through it for a second. So at the end of this, what do we want? Well, we want to get a URL, but in order to get that URL, we're going to have to make some API calls and write some custom functions. They're not complicated, but it will take a few steps. So let's take it step by step. And the first step we need to do is we need to get the ID of the live stream. That is, whenever you have a live stream, Mux generates a unique ID for it, and we need that ID. And we can do that through a simple API call. So let's get out of here and go into our APIs, and let's set one up here, create an API call, and we're going to call this get live stream ID. And the endpoint for this is this API, blah, 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 blah. And you can see on the end here, we have a variable. That's what stuff in brackets in API calls are. They're variables. But sometimes this can be a little bit confusing from when you're reading documentation of the API to actually coding it to bringing it into your app. So let me show you the documentation from Mux. So here we're in the documentation at this URL here, and we're down to that API endpoint right here where we're getting our playback ID. And if you just scroll down here, you can see the URL right here. So that is slash, and what does it mean slash? Well, it's using that first part of the domain, api.mux.com, and then /video, et cetera, et cetera. So you do all of this stuff right here. And then we've got this curly braces playback ID right here. So that is to say, this is a variable that you have to dump in your playback ID in here. So when you make the API call, it wouldn't be this, it would be whatever your playback ID is. So in the Mux documentation, it's communicating variables through curly braces right here inside this curly brace. So wherever you see that, you'd be like, oh, this is a variable. I know this is a dynamic part of the URL string that I need to provide here. But in Flutterflow, variables are denoted by square brackets. So just be aware that it might be a little bit different according to the specific vendor's documentation. So let's set up this variable. It's going to be our playback ID. And it's going to be a string. Okay, that's great. The last thing we got to do is set up our authorization. So if we come over to headers here, add our header, authorization, basic, and then to get our token, we need to grab the token and the secret that we set up originally and encode it. And I'll show you how to do that. So let's just add this call right now. So it's saved what we've done. Come into here. Scroll all the way down to our Mux live stream, grab your token ID, go over to base64encode.org, paste that in, colon, and then paste in your token secret there and encode it. And if you scroll down, here is our API token. Okay, just copy that, go back into your API call and paste that in. We also need to come over to advanced settings and make this API call private. And the reason we need to do this is because we're passing along our authorization token. And so it's possible that a user could download or inspect the code and take this token and use it. But by making it private, this call will be moved into a cloud function so that we're not actually calling this directly. We're calling the cloud function that will then make this API call so that your token is secure in the cloud. Let's save it and let's test our API call. Now, of course, we need a playback ID. So go over to your Mux account, paste it in, and you can see it's going to show you the complete API URL that we're going to be calling here. That is, we had set up a variable, so we can see it here, but it's always helpful to know, hey, what's this URL going to look like at the end of the day after all the query parameters and variables have been put in? Now, if you're seeing some spaces here, that's a bug that should be fixed, so you can probably ignore that. Okay, so let's test our API call. Awesome. Okay, so it works, but we don't really want this whole response. Remember what our API call is named? Get live stream ID. So all we care about is the ID. We have two here, but this is the one we care about, this one that starts with 014. So if we come down here to our JSON paths, and if you don't know what JSON paths are, you can watch this tutorial here, but simply it's just a query language or a way to filter through these results so that we can use them in other places in our app. So an easy way to reference this. And we could set it up ourselves or just go to the recommended and scroll down and look for what we're trying to find. 014, boom, right there, 014. So this is the JSON path for what we want. And so we want to select it. It's not a list, it's just a singular value. And when we come over to selected, we can see that we've got it. Okay, that's great. Let's just give it a name. We'll call it live stream ID, obviously, and we'll save it. Okay, perfect. 1 out of 4 done, because we had 2 API calls and 2 functions we had to write. So that was easy enough. Okay, so let's go back over to the action flow editor to set this up and to see where we're at. Okay, so let's add an API call right here, that one we just set up, and it's the only one we've got, so we do that. Okay, so it's set up, but we need to pass in a value when we run this. That is, we need to pass into it the playback ID. Now, when we tested it, we just grabbed it from our Mux account, but of course, we're not doing that when this actually gets run. So where do we get that value from? Well, let's come in here and let's add our variable, and we want to set the playback ID. That's what we're passing into it as a query string. And of course, we don't want a specific value because it'll be whatever they click on, and it's going to be from a variable. Now, where do we get this? Well, currently we don't have it. It's not in our database anywhere. It's not returned from any API call because that's what we're doing right now. We're calling our first API call, but actually, we do have it, but it's a little hidden. If we come over to our streams here, we set up one dummy stream right here, and we've got a URL link here, but there's nothing in it. And that's because this is created when you start your stream. That is, Mux creates a URL for your stream. So we can just put one in now because the playback ID is inside that URL. So I'll just paste it in here and you can see the structure of it. It's stream.mux, blah, 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 .m3u8. And in the middle here, this is the playback ID. And this is what we need to get out of there. So how do we do that? Well, just a simple custom function, right? This is just normal string transformation stuff, and I'll show you how to do it. So let's come over to here to custom functions. Let's open it up. We haven't set anything up yet, but let's create a new function. We're gonna call this get playback ID from URL because we're getting a playback ID from URL. The return type is a string because we just want that ID. It's not a list. What are we passing in? Well, we're passing in that URL. It's a video path. And lastly, make sure you set nullable to false. And we're ready to write some code. All right, I'm gonna paste the code in here and then we'll talk through it line by line. All right, so we've got a function. It's gonna be returning a string. We're passing in a string whose parameter is called URL. We've got a variable that's going to be a string here. We're taking that URL that we put in and we're replacing the end of that, this file extension here, with nothing. So we're just getting rid of it. Then we're taking that URL without the ending on it. We're splitting it into an array of here is everything before the slash and after it. And then we're just taking the last item in the array, which is the playback ID. Awesome. Okay, let's test our code. We've got our URL here, and when we run it, we get our ID. Okay, great. Let's save that. Okay, so we set up our function, and remember, we have to pass a URL in. So we're gonna pass in from a variable. It's going to be from our streams document, because remember, that's what they clicked on. So let's curl that open. And because we set all our types correctly, we just have our URL, and that's what we want. And so we can confirm it. All right, so now we've got our live stream ID. That's what all that work was to do, was to just get our live stream ID. So let's just call it live stream ID. Next step, we're gonna actually get the live stream because we've got the ID and now we can look it up. And to do that, we need to make another API call. So let's get out of here and go into our API calls, and we're gonna make another one. We're gonna call it get past live stream. And the URL is going to be same as before, except for we're going to do assets here, and we're going to need a query parameter of live stream ID, and it's going to be from a variable because of course we're going to pass it in. We got to create it, and let's just call it something different so we don't mix it up. We're going to call it stream ID. It's going to be of type string. The last thing to do is set up our headers. And so it's the same as before. So we can just come in over here and grab that from our headers. Of course, we're starting to repeat ourselves. What we really would want to do is set up an API group and have our headers as a global variable, but we've only got 2 here, so we can just do this quickly. And now let's go back here because we have to pass in a stream ID, and we got it out of here when we were testing it. So let's test this API call. This is what we want, so let's copy that out of there. We didn't make any changes, so that's fine. So we're coming in here, putting in our stream ID, and test our call. Okay, great, we got a success. Now you might be thinking, wait, this doesn't look like success. There's nothing in here. Yes, that test live stream that we added in doesn't actually have anything in it. It's just kind of like an empty shell. And if you wanna see the structure that we would get back if we did a live stream, you can go over to the Mux documentation at this URL right here, and you can see an example response. So you can see we got an object here with a data property just like ours, but inside you will have these things: tracks, status, playback IDs, etc. And what we want out of here is a certain JSON path that I'll just paste in right here. And let's just name it playback ID. And so if we look at this here, it's data, the 0th item in that array, playback IDs, 0th, and ID. So if we look at here, we've got data, then to playback IDs, and then the ID right here. All right, so this second API call is done. And so we just have one more function to write, and the hardest bit of this is over. So let's go back to our flow and set up this API call. So we go into streams and grab our container here. Open that up. So first we get our live stream ID. If that succeeds, then we're going to want to get our playback ID. That's the API call we just set up. Okay, so we'll set up another one in here, and we'll add an action, and it's going to be another API call. And now we have 2 in here, and we want to get past live stream. And we remember we have to pass in the live stream ID from here. And it's not going to be a specific value. It's going to be from a variable. And which variable? It's going to be from an action output right here. And here it is from our live stream ID. And we come in here and we want it from our JSON body and from a path. And we set up a path for this. And it's the live stream ID. Beautiful. And if you remember here, when we come into our backend call right here, we're setting the name of that variable here. So this is live stream ID. Okay, sweet. And so if this succeeded and we get the past live stream, that is, that past live stream will be the ID, then we're ready to construct our URL. And we have to construct our URL because the playback ID that we ultimately get from this last call will be inside the URL. So we just need to do a simple function that puts together a string. But that URL is something that will pass to the page. So we don't need an extra step for a function. We can just add that in as a parameter in a navigate action. It'll make sense when we do it. So let's just add a navigation action here. We want to navigate to our live stream viewer page. Remember, we see this pass here because we've already set up a URL, and this is beautiful programming because we're not repeating ourselves. We can use that over in both flows that we're setting up here. And so we can pass a value. That's exactly what we want, a URL. We don't want a specific value. We want it from a variable, and we want to combine a text. Because here's what we want. I'm just going to dump it in here, and then we'll break it out into the different parts of the string. Okay. So here is the URL. So we've got this mux.com, blah, blah, blah. Then we have this playback, and then we have this file format. So this in here, of course, is our variable. So this is going to have to be the middle member of this string concatenation. So let's just take this, and I'm just going to cut this to my clipboard, add another text, add another text. So down here, we can add in our .m3u8, and then here will be the dynamic element. So just come over here to bind it from a variable, and it'll come from our action outputs and poorly named API result 517, twirl that down. And remember, we set up a JSON path for that. So there it is, our playback ID. That's what we want to dump in the middle. And there we go, we're all good. We are almost done. The next step we have to do is once the user navigates to that page, we have to bind that URL to the actual video player. So let's go over there, and we want to go into our live stream viewer page. And here's our video player. And right now we just have the dummy path that you get when you drop in the widget. So we want to set this from a variable, and look at how beautiful this is. We've just got it sitting right here because we've already passed that in. So we don't have any work to do. It's already done for us. So we can just add that in. And with that, our app is done. Now, you can't test this in test or run mode. You have to download the code and run it on a real device. We have documentation that we've linked below. Thanks for checking out this video. Feel free to leave any questions you have in the comments below, and let us know if there's any videos you would like to see. Thanks so much.